Episode 4. As I regarded my children now, nearly 6 years later, I wondered if I was ready for what they were suggesting. I'd told myself I'd live at the farm forever. My mind, my heart, and my soul had collectively made a pact. Yes, I'd effectively killed my husband. Given reckless power to his habitually cautious foot on that pedal, sped his car too fast around that bend which he usually took so slowly, and into the path of that oncoming tractor. But by golly, I'd make amends, and never go back to what I considered to be the good life, the best life. How could I pop to the fancy grocer's at the end of my new road in South Kensington? How could I nip to Harvey Nichols or have lunch at Beecham Place? Didn't I know I had a project to finish? That I owed it to David's memory, to our love? The children were waiting, watching me closely in the small basement flat. "Why not, Mum?" Lucy asked in the voice she used when she was trying not to upset me. If only she knew how I'd upset her. Not the bit she knew about, the bit she'd overheard, the next bit. How I'd ruined her young life. Watched as she rebelled at her new school, got into trouble, refused to work, so grief-stricken was she. And then, at the last moment, almost in a show of defiance, studied hard for her final exams and, bright girl that she was, passed with flying colours. But then regressed again, as if to prove she could turn it on and off just like that. I'd had to sit by as she'd drunk too much and come home at all hours. I recalled the shouting matches we'd have in the kitchen as I waited up for her, how she'd made the wrong friends, refused to go to university, and headed instead to London, with no plan and no money. How worried I'd been. Ironically, she'd found her path through her love of the country, or at least of nature and horticulture. A love so like her father's, I sometimes wondered if it was a homage to him. With no help from anyone except a bank who'd given her a loan, how I wished I'd been a fly on the wall in that meeting, witnessed her giving it what for, using all the powers of her considerable persuasion. She had taken a lease on a shop in Islington and turned it into a florist. She'd never looked back. She'd made a remarkable go of her new life in London, which she'd missed, had always missed, she confided to me once in rare tears. Yes, if only Lucy knew. I gazed into her beautiful blue almond-shaped eyes full of concern for me now. I'm not sure, I stuttered. "Come on, Mum, it'll be brilliant. You'd love it," urged Nico, who by now, knowing less, was less complicated. "Sell the farm and we'll all move back." Minna, I noticed, was quiet. Her heart had recently been broken and the pieces were scattered back home in the valley. Ted Forrester was the culprit, a local lad she'd been seeing on and off since she was 14. I wondered if she'd had second thoughts, having initially been caught up in her siblings' enthusiasm. "So what about Granny and Grandpa?" I objected, playing for time. G&G love it down there. They won't move," Lucy said, "but it doesn't mean we have to stay. They'd hate that." It was true, my parents were independent and, having been provincial, were now happily rural. Like David and like so many people, they dreamed of escaping to the country and were at the farm even now, feeding my flock, happily seeing to the animals, walking the dogs. I don't know. "Sleep on it," Lucy said firmly. I nodded, not quite trusting my voice. And so I did. We all did, in varying degrees of discomfort. The following morning, Lucy cornered me in Sophia's bedroom. She came in and sat down on the edge of the bed. "Do it, Mum." I looked up at her. "We'll see." Selling the farm, of course, would be the first step, I thought, as I allowed myself to give it a moment of serious contemplation. I realized it made me feel euphoric. I felt a huge rush of relief. To release that millstone from around my neck, that terrible weight, the source of so much pain, so much anxiety, the relentless demands of the animals, the crumbling brickwork, the constant repatching and mending of the barns, and, yes, I could say goodbye to all that. In the knowledge that I'd given it my best shot, I hadn't fled as soon as David had died. I'd gritted my teeth and done my best. I caught my breath as I sensed the far-off promise of possibility, the distant click of something quietly slotting into place in the fullness of time, which was now. Everything turns at some point, and for me, that moment had arrived. I left a note for Minna and Nico, then, shutting the door quietly, I left the darkened flat. I went west along the Brompton Road. My destination was the little cafe beside the pub at the end of Blastow Mews. Once installed at the table outside, I ordered a cappuccino and fished my phone from my pocket and rang Peter Cox. Peter was a sweet man, tweedy, affable, and good-natured. He had indeed taken me out to supper once. He'd gone so pink when he'd asked me outside the baker's in the village, I hadn't the heart to say no. I rang him now, knowing there would be no awkwardness. He was far from stupid, and had known I'd been going through the motions that night. There'd been no spark, and he hadn't followed up. His secretary put me through, and I'd outlined my plan. There was a pause at the other end of the line. Well, yes, the house itself should be fairly straightforward to sell, as long as you price it right. You mean low? I do rather in this market. Okay. But the question is whether you'll sell the land separately. Not many people want as many as 90 acres. It's neither one thing nor the other. Not enough to be a viable farm, and too much for most people to manage as a hobby. Tell me about it. Most people want 10 acres with a paddock for a pony, and that's it. Or 1,000, of course. So you think sell the land separately? I do. The house will go much quicker. But who will want the land? It occurred to us both at the same time. Peter cleared his throat. He'd been one of the people at the bar that night at the Fox and Hounds when I hadn't materialized. Well, Paddy, obviously. Yes, obviously. His land abutted mine. And he'd possibly even take the animals too. Oh, I doubt it. He's terribly rude about them. Well, yes, I have no idea, of course, he said quickly. Not my field, and they can always go to the market. Exactly. Tell you what, Peter was saying. I'll have a little ask around and see who's interested. There's Adam and Joe Fox on your right side. They might well want the land. Oh, yes, try the Foxes, I said urgently, far more keen to talk to them than to the irascible Mr. Campbell. Try them first, Peter, would you? As I pocketed my phone, I realized the die was cast. My heart quickened in slight panic. Well, not entirely cast. No, nothing was decided. I just inched my life forward a very tiny bit. I rang my mother next to canvass her opinion, but got my father instead, who sounded strangely delighted. Best decision you've made for years, love. Leave the ruddy place. I'm so pleased you don't think I'm abandoning you, Dad, jumping ship. I paused, my eyes simultaneously following a black cab, which had turned left from the main road down into the mews, and was slowing down and stopping now, outside the pink house. Not at all, my love. I think it's a great idea. Dad, I'm really sorry. I was on my feet suddenly, watching the cab door open. I'm going to have to go. See what Mum thinks, would you? Oh, she'll agree with me. We've been saying it for ages in private. The children, too. It's time you moved on. Yes, I know. I've spoken to them. Bye, Dad. Speak soon, I said quickly. I rifled in my bag and left money in my saucer for the coffee, eyes still peeled. The tall blonde man in a baggy sea green shirt today, obviously not tucked in, jeans artistically ripped at the knee, was now out of the cab and paying the driver at the window. If I was quick, I could make it. I moved down the little cobbled street. I was able to intercept him just as he walked to the door, key in hand. "Excuse me," I said breathlessly, aware he was terribly handsome with the most terrific green eyes, and wishing I'd had the foresight to put on a bit of makeup when I was at Lucy's flat. He looked at me, surprised. He smiled inquiringly. "Excuse me," I faltered again. I just wondered if I could possibly ask you something." "By all means." He looked amused, smiling down at me from quite a height, as one might regard a child. You see, my husband's uncle lived here, in this house, the pink one, Cuthbert Faulkner. And, well, the thing is, I came the other day and I wasn't aware that anyone lived here, so—" "You're Cuthbert's niece?" His green eyes brightened, intrigued. "In-law, yes." "Ah, so you're inheriting. Camilla told me you'd popped round." "That's right," I said gratefully. "Well, I'm Felix Carrington. Lovely to meet you." He was outstretching a tanned hand, which I took, another warm smile blasting down on me, loads of white teeth. "We knew you were the heir. Don't worry, I'll have him out of here in a jiffy. I promise. Before it's all official and everything, it's just, we did wonder." He knitted his brow and looked anxious. "Well, Cuthbert only died a matter of weeks ago, you know. It's quite hard. There's so much to do. I hope you'll bear with us." His eyes searched mine. "Just for a few days?" I gaped at him. "Sorry?" "Oh, Lord, what am I doing making you stand outside in the street? Come in, come in. You'll have a cuppa?" He opened the door and Camilla appeared down the hall, a bulging black bin bag in one hand and her jacket in the other. "Hi, Felix, I was just off. Oh. Her face darkened as she recognized me. "It's you. Back again? Give us a chance, can't you?" "Oh, But she deliberately turned away from me. "I'll be back tomorrow, Felix. I've done the meds and made start on all the stuff in the desk. You just need to feed the cat." And flashing me another sharp look, she strode past, out to the dustbins where she dumped her black sack, letting the lid fall with a defiant clatter before making for her black Mini. "Don't mind her," Felix told me as he shut the door behind us. "She was very fond of Cuthbert and has her own views on what should be happening now, which, frankly, she should keep to herself. Now," he beamed, hands on his hips, "what's your poison? Earl Grey? Builders? And then you'll have to excuse me very briefly, and I'll make your tea first. I might take him one too, actually." Him? I perched on a stool, completely at a loss. "My father, upstairs." Your father is upstairs?" "Yes, in bed. He's had the flu." "Yes, but why is who is your father?" "Why, Robert, of course." He saw my blank face. "Cuthbert's partner." "His partner?" "Yes, you didn't know." "Cuthbert was gay?" "Yes, Dad was his boyfriend." My head was spinning. So how long had they been together? Oh, about 20-odd years, I suppose. Not officially, of course. No civil partnership or anything like that. And plenty of sabbaticals along the way. He laughed. In their younger days, they fought like cat and dog. But on and off, yes, about that. I didn't know. Didn't you? Well, no reason you should, I suppose. The family weren't exactly close, I gather. No, they weren't. David didn't seem to have any relatives. They certainly didn't gather at the drop of a hat like mine. And of course, years ago, it was much less accepted. So, he shrugged again. It was less talked about too, I guess. Yes. I was about to form another question when I heard a shuffling behind me in the hallway. "Ah, speak of the devil," Felix cried. "I didn't expect to see you up, Pa. How are you feeling?" "Much better, darling." A deep, quavering, cut-glass voice made me turn. When I did, it was to see a tall, rather grand-looking old gentleman who, despite the silk paisley dressing gown and slippers, was still managing to pull off dapper. He had a thick shock of white hair swept back from his forehead and chiselled features that I could see would have made him very handsome in his youth. He still was handsome, in fact, and his son was the image of him. Although I've still got this wretched cough that I'd bloody well like to get shot of. Who said old age is not for sissies? Bet Davis, I think. Who's this delightful creature? He gave me a dazzling smile, his whole face creased up as he carefully manoeuvred down the step into the kitchen, holding the door frame but still keeping his eyes on me. Someone you haven't told me about, you old rascal? Good morning, my dear. Is he behaving? Felix laughed. Oh, no, Dad, this is... I say, I'm so sorry, I don't even know your name. Molly Faulkner, I breathed. Molly Faulkner, repeated Felix. My dad, Robert Carrington. Molly is Cuthbert's niece, he told him carefully. She's inheriting his estate. Robert's manners were as impeccable as his appearance. He didn't miss a beat. Of course, that's it. Naturally you are. Well, how lovely to meet you, my dear. I hope you'll stay for a while. Have you been offered some refreshment? Ever since I'd met these delightful people, all I'd been offered was tea, hospitality, and warmth. I felt shabby in comparison. I have, and I'm so sorry to be here at all, disturbing you like this. It's just, well, I couldn't resist another peek at the house. Naturally, he broke in, rescuing me. Who wouldn't be intrigued? I certainly would. Would you like to take a look around properly? Pop upstairs. Happily, I've made the bed, but believe me, that's not always the case. No, I'm intruding quite enough as it is, and I'm so sorry about your terrible loss. You must be devastated. Robert's face collapsed briefly, and he momentarily lost his composure. He regained it quickly enough, though, nodding. Thank you, my dear. Time heals, of course, but he was my very greatest friend. Naturally, I miss him dreadfully. We all do, said Felix sadly. Do you have any pictures of him? I asked tentatively. Only David and I never really knew him. I'm not sure why. I do. Masses of them. Come with me, my dear. Nothing would give me greater pleasure. Dad, shall I make you some tea? Called Felix after us. Please, darling, he called back. Loving the way he called his son darling, I followed Robert as he crossed to a mahogany bureau at the far end of the room beside the French windows. The top was crowded with photographs, but he carefully selected a large studio portrait. It was of a handsome man in his 60s, wearing a velvet jacket and a floral shirt. He regarded it fondly for a moment before passing it to me. There he is. You'll see the resemblance, I think. To David's father, he meant, and I spotted it immediately. They were both handsome men, but this one looked more genial. He and your husband's father fell out years ago, of course. David tried to heal the rift when he was still quite a young man. He was fond of Cuthbert. It didn't work, but Cuthbert was grateful. I didn't know that. I was taken aback that I hadn't known. I wonder why he didn't mention it. I suppose I never knew Cuthbert, but even so, I do vaguely remember some drama about David's relatives when I first met him. They did keep in touch, you know. David and Cuthbert? Wrote and then emailed, had lunch about once a year in the city. I met him once, David. He came to the house. He came here? Now I was really staggered. When? I mean, why didn't he say? Obviously, Robert didn't know the answer to that either. But such was my astonishment that I just couldn't help voicing it. Well, he hesitated. There was our sexuality, of course. Yes, but David wasn't like that. No, but... Robert picked his words carefully. I gather his father might have been. Yes, he was. He was a nightmare, if I'm honest. My late father-in-law made no secret of his homophobia. his intolerance of immigrants, or even women working full-time. I had a hard time over that. David was terrified of his father, as you know, Robert told me gently. He probably got so used to keeping his uncle's secret, he felt it easier to withhold it from you in case it slipped out, to his parents inadvertently. Not that you would have deliberately, but you wouldn't perhaps ascribe it so much importance. People never do when the secrets aren't their own. Or, I don't know, if you told one of the children it might come out that way over lunch or something. Yes, I agreed, knowing that sharing a confidence made it uncontrollable, and that David liked control. I mean, not in a horrid way, he wasn't domineering, he just didn't like anything messy and chaotic. But still, it was odd. I didn't think David and I had secrets. Well, except my stocking great one, of course. But then, when his parents died, I was thinking aloud now. Yes, I agree. Robert frowned thoughtfully. Some sort of warped loyalty, perhaps, to his father's memory? I don't know, my dear. He looked anxious, as if worried he'd upset me. Heavens, no, why should you know? It's no big deal. A man can have a quiet lunch with his uncle. It's just... Well, you never really know someone, do you? Completely. He smiled. Never. But surely that's what's so interesting. Not having it all on a plate. He chuckled. Cuthbert certainly kept a few things back from me, I'm sure. I know I did too. I sighed. Yes, that's probably where I go wrong. I have a nasty feeling I'm dripping off the sides of the plate, and all over the table too. He laughed. But we'll never know, will we? They've both taken those lunches to the grave. I looked at a picture of Robert and Cuthbert, smiling broadly, arm in arm in the sunshine. There was so much I wanted to ask David now. Felix had joined us now. Robert motioned for us to sit on the creamy sofas under the bay window, amongst the books and the art. I could feel Felix's eyes on me. I turned to Robert. "This is your house," I blurted out suddenly. "Not mine. You and Cuthbert were as good as married. It's not my inheritance, it's yours." Robert gazed in surprise, then threw back his head and laughed. "Nonsense, my dear. It's not remotely mine. I've never expected it, and Cuthbert never intended it." "You talked about it?" "No, but..." "Well then, how do you know he wouldn't have left it to you?" "Because it wasn't in his will." "He didn't leave a will." "No, so in a way he didn't he?" he said calmly, smiling still. "He left it to the will of the country. The law of the land. I believe he didn't want the responsibility. That was very Cuthbert." Felix was very still. "Anyway, I don't want it," said Robert firmly. "I'm off to Felix's studio to be surrounded by lovely paintings in my dotage." "Oh, you're an artist?" I turned to Felix. Felix smiled. "Yes, but there's less painting these days. I do installations now, that sort of thing." "I see." "I see." I didn't. What was an installation? I racked my brain. Like a Tracy Emin bed type thing? Well, yes. That's rather old hat now, but in a way. Fine art, or the practice of it. Turner Prize territory. Oh, I love Turner. All blazing sunsets and ships at dawn. Father and son smiled. I felt I'd offered up the house in a rash moment, but that it had been equally swiftly refused. So I'd surely done my bit, made the gesture. I could see my children's horrified faces, hear their shrieks. "What are you doing, Mum? We're the only blood relatives. It's the law." I quaked silently at my narrow escape and concentrated on my tea. I realized that this was a completely different life, one with sunlit antiques and paintings in elegantly curtained rooms. Thoughtful, engaging people who dressed well and talked of literature and the theatre before popping off to the latest exhibition at the Tate Modern. I wanted this new life so much it hurt. I'd have to shape up, of course. I sat up. Lose a few pounds, get some new clothes, have some highlights, that type of thing. But I could do it. And now I had more time, I could do it properly. I really could become one of those truly leisured women in SW3. And yes, friends too. Sylvia and I had originally kept in touch, but only via email. I hadn't answered her calls. Rosie had tried hard too, and Caroline also, although she'd abruptly gone quiet. I'd often wake up in the small wee hours, wondering how much she knew. All had eventually given up, assuming sadly I'd gone into my shell after David's death. The last time I'd seen them had been at the funeral, which was a blur, although Rosie had driven down unannounced once afterwards, had a cup of tea. But I hadn't made her very welcome. I'd been so terrified to see her, feeding the hens in the front yard as her convertible BMW drove in, my hand frozen on the grain in the bucket as I recognized her smiling and waving at the wheel. Speech had deserted me as she'd got out in smart jeans and long leather boots with a huge bunch of flowers. I couldn't get rid of her fast enough, and it was a long drive from London. I'd been so scared that she was going to say something about Henri or Caroline, which I knew would send me shooting back to square one in terms of guilt and remorse and depression. That I'd manufactured an appointment with a lawyer to get rid of her. She'd known, though. I'd seen her sad face as she got back in the car. But I could find new friends here, I thought. I had friends at home, of course. Anna, enormously fun and jolly, but 10 years older than me. And Tia, of course, and... I realized with a start that my tea was cold and the room was very quiet. Robert and Felix were looking at me. "Are you all right, my dear?" Robert looked anxious. "Me? Oh, yes, oh gosh, sorry." I got hurriedly to my feet. They rose instantly as one. "Oh, I must be away," I said, beaming. "You've been more than kind, and I've intruded on your time for far too long. I can't thank you enough for telling me about Cuthbert, and please, how did one say, take your time, don't rush to get out, I'm in no hurry without sounding like a patronizing landlord." Predictably, Felix came to my rescue. "And we'll be in touch about the timings," he said with easy grace, walking me to the front door. "I've already organized a small removal van next week to take Dad's stuff. But there's hardly anything. Most was Cuthbert's, which stays put, so..." I stopped. "You mean the art? The furniture?" Of course, he was a great collector, always at the auction houses, and Pa was his greatest supporter. They had such fun trawling, but it was all Cuthbert's. Lordy, I felt a bit faint at this news. Could imagine the children saying, "Sell it! Must be worth a fortune!" But I wouldn't. I would love to be surrounded by it. "So perhaps if we swap emails," Felix was saying. He drew his phone from his back pocket, and I was equally quick on the draw. I'd swap anything with this man. Was he married? I wondered. He hadn't mentioned a wife, but why would he? Or perhaps he was gay too. No, I didn't think so. He was way out of my league, of course, and if he was married, completely out of bounds. I was never going there again. But close up, which I was now, he was older than he looked, definitely older than me, by a few years, just incredibly well preserved, which I wasn't. But I bloody well would be soon. Oh, you betcha. I shook hands eagerly with Robert, who'd followed us down, agreeing it had been absolutely lovely to meet, and assured them the house was completely gorgeous, which was probably the crassest thing I could have said. Even Robert looked nonplussed. I'm so glad you like it," he murmured as I flushed to my roots. With a smile he took his leave, letting his son see me off, but as I stepped outside I turned. I saw him go back down the hall, his correct military stance drooping a little. The figure I recalled as he put his hand on the banister to steady himself and to go on upstairs was not of a proud, stately gentleman, but an old man, still suffering from flu and grief, and worn out now by conversation, going back to bed. Felix turned to me, his eyes slightly anxious. Now Dad's out of earshot. I wonder, would you mind terribly meeting me on my own? For lunch, perhaps? For a mad moment, I thought he was asking me out. My heart leapt right up into my throat. Already? Then, in a nanosecond, I realized it was about his father. Of course. Father or not, there was no way I was turning that down. His eyes practically matched the faded sea-green shirt he was wearing. Did he know that? Shall we say next week? I have to judge a prize on aesthetic relations in Venice this week. It's the Biennale. But I'll be back on Tuesday. May I take the liberty of booking a table somewhere? May he? Blinkin' heck, he could book a hotel somewhere. No, of course he couldn't. I didn't mean that. But I realized it was the first time in 5 years I'd actually been attracted to anyone. Ridiculously, I felt as if I was being carried along on a carpet of air as I tripped lightly across the cobbles. I knew I had a lot to do, and precious little time to do it. I had to dash to Earl's Court and collect my things, then I had to get to King's Cross and trundle back down to Herefordshire to hassle Peter pronto. That depressing, energy-sapping farm had to go. I would have my new life. I clenched my fists excitedly. Before I went back to Lucy's, though, I headed up the King's Road to make a few purchases. One was a shed load of new makeup from the department on the first floor at Peter Jones, and the other was a large, shiny book which I found in Waterstones, entitled Contemporary Art and Relational Aesthetics. On the way home, I made 2 discoveries. One was that it doesn't matter how much ruinously expensive touche éclat you slather on your face in an effort to cover the red thread veins over your wind-blown cheeks, they still bloody shine through. And the other was that my hunch about fine or contemporary art had been right. It was not fine at all. Not in the way you or I would imagine. It was not glorious oil paintings of damsels in crinolines or strutting cavalry officers in tight breeches, à la Gainsborough. It is indeed naked men in buckets, and the rubber ducks are not necessarily in their mouths. I'd rung Peter from the train, and he'd agreed to come and value the farm properly. He said he'd put some feelers out already and that the feedback was encouraging. Oh, good, Peter, I breathed happily. So you don't think it'll take long? Well, we'll see, won't we? We don't have to give it away, do we? Can I ask, what's the tearing hurry anyway, Molly? He could, but I wouldn't give him a straight answer. Indeed, I mumbled something about it having been on my mind for a long time, ages in fact, but now I'd finally crossed a line and made a decision, which was rubbish, of course. I'd decided in the space of about a day and confirmed it over a pair of green eyes. 2 pairs of brown ones, one more hazel, Peter's, and the others darker, like hard chocolate chips, were waiting for me in the yard as I sped in, scattering chickens. Oh, Lord, Paddy Campbell too? What was he doing here? Ah, of course, sizing up my land already. You don't waste much time, do you? I cried as I got out of the car. What do you mean? He said stiffly. Well, I imagine Peter told you I'm leaving. Offered you the land? No, I didn't know that. A muscle went in his cheek. Annoyance, no doubt, at not being the first to know. No, I hadn't mentioned it, Peter said quickly. Thought we'd discuss it first. Decide which paddock you want to keep with the house. As we said, the long meadow is the obvious one, but I wanted to make sure. We turned as one and gazed at the daisy and buttercup-strewn meadow at the back of the house. Long and lush, it was looking particularly enchanting today with my goat, Monty, grazing it. In fact, the whole place looked magical, floating with early cow parsley whose heads bobbed like little clouds in the faint breeze, the woods beyond speckled with creamy wild garlic, the sun, on this glorious day, glistening on the river which meandered through the valley. You reminded me of the day David first brought me here, and of course I'd patched up the house since then, so it was in much better state, with newly painted windows and reappointed eaves and mown lawns. Even the fencing was looking good. But I knew the reality, the eccentric plumbing, the galloping damp, the leaky basement, the mice, rats even, the cold, depressing winter months, trudging across the rock-hard fields at 6 a.m. with my axe to crack ice on troughs, my hands frozen with cold. April was definitely the cruelest month, in that it was surely the most deceptive. "I think the long meadow," I said firmly. "It's the obvious one. The rest we can parcel up and sell separately. Might you be interested, Paddy?" "Depends. Where are you going?" "I'm off to London," I said gaily, for all the world like Dick Whittington sailing off to the gold-paved streets. "Back home, really." I was aware that my eyes were shining and that Paddy's were like flints. "Bully for you." "I've come into an inheritance," I went on, knowing it was nobody's business but my own, but unable to contain myself. "A relative of David's has died." Paddy shrugged. "Well, you know what they say. Where there's a will, there's a relative." I frowned, unsure how to take that. "So, I was thinking," Peter broke in, aware that sparks were about to fly, "that there's no rush then, surely, Molly. It's not as if you have to sell the farm in order to buy London, is it? Why not take it more slowly, get the best price?" "Oh, no, I want to be shot of the worry. And you know when you've made a decision, you just want to be there. In that place in your head you've decided you want to be? Since in my head I had a cosy supper with Felix in my new kitchen, sharing a bottle of wine, eyes locked over a dish of pasta. The 2 men in my front yard looked understandably blank. "So what are you doing here, Paddy?" I turned, "if not sizing up my acres?" "Your mother called me. One of your ewes can't get up. She's grazing lying down." "Oh, no, which one?" "I don't know which one," he said irritably. "A Hampshire, by the far field, 2 lambs at foot." "Okay, let's go and see. Peter, do you mind taking a look round the house on your own?" I was going to suggest that anyway," he said. "It's easier, actually. Don't have to ooh and ah." "Well, quite. Watch the last few steps down to the cellar. They're completely rotten. I usually jump them." "Hang on," I told Paddy. "Back in a mo." I darted round to the back door, found some boots and a puffer jacket, ditched my handbag and came back to meet him. "Molly sports her country wardrobe," I told him with a grin, striking a pose. He didn't answer, and I added, "no sense of humour," to my list. In fact, I could tell he was in a filthy temper. We walked in silence through the bright spring grass, sparkling with jewel-like dragonflies, down to the slope where the ewes were, beyond the stream. Usually I made conversation to jolt him out of his mood, but today I couldn't be bothered. I'd wait for him, I decided. It would be interesting to see how long it took. It was interesting. He didn't bother either, nor did he seem uncomfortable with the silence. "The novelty's really worn off, hasn't it?" he said finally. I looked at him angrily. "Sorry, you've worked hard here, Molly. No one's denying that." Wrong-footed, I closed my mouth, was about to come back with something snappy, but more even-tempered when, over his shoulder, I realized who it was on her side, trying to graze uncomfortably. "Oh, no, it's Rita!" I darted across. Paddy followed. "Typical!" I cried as I sank to my knees. "It's never the ones who are awful mothers and drive you mad, always the ones you care about." I scratched her head and she looked up at me with unusually bleary eyes. Oh, thank you for coming, Paddy. She's feeding triplets, not twins, and she's one of my absolute favourites. Well, I've given her a shot of steroids and some antibiotics, he said, squatting beside me, but I can't promise anything. She's a mystery, actually. I've lifted her up repeatedly, but she collapses again, and there's no mastitis. Should I feed the lambs? No, she's managing. I should leave her to it. It might distress her more to have them taken away. Oh, I'd leave them here. I just meant as a supplement. Then she'll bag up and get swollen. I'd leave her. Just check she's not worse in the morning. But to be honest, Molly, she can't get to water like this, and although they don't drink much, she'll need it if she's feeding. Can't I bring a bucket to her? How's she going to get her head in? I could bury it in a hole. He gave me a withering look. This is a sheep, not a household pet. No, if she can't get up tomorrow, put a bullet in her. Or get Nico to. Cheaper than getting me out again. I took a deep breath, let it out shakily. The farmers round here all thought I was soft. I mean, none of them could believe I'd kept Maggie, the chestnut mare, who'd been dumped in my field in foal, no doubt by gypsies. I stood up. Thanks, Paddy. I won't put a bullet in her. I'll call you out again if I may. But it's the last of my vet's bills, so that's something. He shrugged, but didn't say anything. I gazed around the undulating emerald-green meadows, the hills rising gently beyond, tinged with blue in the hazy mirage from the sun. Do you want this, Paddy, my land? That's what Peter was referring to. He thinks it's too much with the house. Says people only want a pony paddock. I might well, he said cagily, following my gaze. I looked at him, knowing he was playing it cool. No countryman ever turned down adjoining land. Okay, yes, definitely. Don't offer it to anyone else. Please, I said teasingly. Please, he added grudgingly. Oh, he was all charm. What is it, 86, 87 acres? 88. Do you want to walk around it? I might. I knew he was dying to. I shrugged. Well, suit yourself. He did. He strode off, taking his cast-iron ego with him, in the direction of the river and the fields beyond. He'd clearly be coming to his own conclusions. I watched until his dark head disappeared down the dip in the land that flanked the river. Inside, Peter was infinitely more polite, and he agreed it was in pretty good shape, but appreciated it was a mammoth task to keep it that way. Every time I finish painting one set of windows, there's another broken sash to fix, or the heating system breaks down again. It's like the fourth bridge, and I don't want to spend my days being a maintenance man. He nodded. I know, it's been a Herculean effort, but we'll miss you, Molly. Nonsense, I hardly know anyone, apart from you and Anna and the Frenches, and Tom and Pam and the Pipers, and Biddy. Well, the Foxes, I suppose. That's pretty much everyone in the valley. I wanted to say, yes, but don't you see how limiting that is? How can you bear it? But I knew it was his much-loved life. Paddy suddenly appeared at the kitchen window. You've got ragwort in most of the fields. They'll all need sorting out, and you haven't sprayed for months. I sprayed in January, I roared. Well, that's a bloody stupid time to do it. Nothing would have germinated. If you're moving the ewes, I'd spray again next week. Why don't you mind your own business? I bellowed. These are not your fields yet, and frankly, they may never be. He shrugged, unconcerned. Suit yourself. I'm just saying, if you want the best price, you'll want them in good order. It's only like Peter telling you to put a course of damp-proof on the wet patch. He nodded at the north wall behind the stairs. There was indeed a large telltale sign. Yes, but Peter's an estate agent. You're a ruddy vet, and if you're not interested in the land, mind your own business, Paddy. He really did bring out the worst in me. Oh, I want it, just pointing out its imperfections before you try to put an inflated price on it. Let me know the damage, Peter. And with that and a rare grin, he withdrew. I fumed for a moment as Peter diplomatically drained his coffee and got to his feet. I'll be away too, Molly. I'll send a photographer around and have brochures out by next week, I promise. In the event, however, we didn't need a photographer or the brochures. Peter rang that evening, a bit breathless, to ask if he could show a couple round in the morning. I assured him that he most certainly could, simultaneously plumping the cushions and kicking a magazine under the sofa. They came as promised, a lovely middle-aged couple who I only met briefly. I was out checking on Rita, who miraculously seemed a bit better. She was on her feet, which I felt was one in the eye for that know-it-all vet. Anyway, the delightful couple promptly made an offer the following afternoon, which was so stratospheric I had to put the phone to my chest a moment and shut my eyes and breathe. It was light years away from what we'd paid for the place. I thanked Peter profusely and said I'd accept. Then I rang the children to enthuse. They were delighted, particularly at the price, but I could tell there was something in their voices that was wistful and a little nostalgic. "So it's really going?" said Minna. "Yes, darling, it is." "Which means I'll never see Ted again." "Well, that's what you wanted, isn't it, my love? Remember how you said you never wanted to see him? Listen, I must go. I have to ring the others." I spoke to Nico, who said, "Okay, whatever," which was a bit rich, considering he'd been so keen, but naturally the one I lost it with was Lucy. "You were the ones who bloody told me to," I snapped, when she said something about how much she'd missed the orchard, the apple blossom every year. I know, it's brilliant. It's a shame we can't keep both, really." "Well, we can't," I said shortly. "Stop being so bloody spoiled. Some people don't have a home at all." And then, to change the subject, and also because I couldn't help it and had to tell someone, I told her about the divine Felix Carrington. She went quiet a moment. "Well, I certainly don't think you should have lunch with him, Mum." "Why not? You're always telling me to go out more, always trying to fix me up with someone, and for the first time in 5 years I've met someone I wouldn't actually mind sharing a lunch table with." "Yes, but obviously he's going to lay the guilt trip on you. He'll try to make you feel bad about having the house." "Oh, don't be silly. I'm sure he just wants to ask me to be sensitive to his father's wishes, not to change the decor or something." "How's his father going to see the decor?" "Or, I don't know, maybe ask if Robert can come back and visit, or who knows. Perhaps he fancies me, Lucy." "Who, the father?" "No, the father's a relic, and gay. No, Felix." "Oh, right. I thought you said he was a complete dude. Ripped jeans, brown ankles, moccasins." I was speechless. "I have ripped jeans, Lucy." "Right. Well, okay. Well, you know." "What?" "Just don't make a fool of yourself, Mum. Peter Cox is one thing, but some hunk nipping off to Venice to judge the art biennale is quite another. What are you going to wear?" "What was I—" "You saw me. My best blue dress, very smart, my white jacket." "Oh, yes, yeah, right. Well, I rest my case. So just tread carefully, Mum, okay? He clearly thinks you're some hick from the sticks, foaming at the mouth at all the glamour and sophistication of London. He might try to sweet-talk you, that's all." My mouth opened and shut at her gall. I was dumbfounded. Didn't she remember the days when I'd flit back from my office in Covent Garden, head to toe, and Agnes B? No, of course she didn't. No more than she'd remember the charming little cashmere tunic I wore over the black capri pants, which I'd taken to Paris, and understandably never worn again. But she could mock all she liked. I had once been a sophisticated woman, and given a pair of tweezers and a crash diet, could easily be that woman again. She'd already gone, though, with barely a goodbye, as apparently her other cell phone, was ringing, and it was Robin. I snapped my ancient phone shut. Yes, well, I was busy too. Had things to do. Masses, in fact. I headed upstairs to run a foaming scented bath and to make preparations for the forthcoming campaign.